Good day, everybody. My name is Alireza Jafarzadeh. I'm the Deputy Director of the National Council of Residents of Iran U.S. Representative Office. Welcome to the live stream from our office in Washington, D.C. And sorry for the brief delay. We had some technical glitches we had to overcome. Today, what I'm going to do is to release a report that has been put together by our office in Washington, D.C. about the tactics pursued by the Iranian regime throughout the negotiations ever since it started back in 2003, Tehran's objectives, and the tactics they have used in order to reach to their objectives. For that purpose, I'm going to basically walk you through the report, and then we are going to take some questions. You can raise your questions anytime from now on Twitter by using hashtag #AskNCRI. I repeat, hashtag #AskNCRI. And you may also email your questions to info@ncrius.org. I repeat, email your questions to info@ncrius.org. So let's begin with the report. The report basically had two purposes. First, to assess the principles of the negotiations from Tehran's perspectives. What are the principles governing their negotiations ever since the talks started in 2003 and continuing until as we speak, actually right now, just a week before the upcoming deadline of June 30th. And the second thing was basically to examine the tactics used by Tehran to reach its objectives throughout the negotiations. So we had to really address several questions. The first question was that, is Tehran really pursuing a specific strategy and tactics to move towards a solution, or Tehran's tactics basically were decided at every juncture based on conditions and given parameters at that juncture? So was it an ad hoc procedure they were pursuing, or they had a solid plan since day one? And therefore, what lessons can be learned, what experiences can be drawn from dozens of rounds of talks regarding the conduct of the Iran regime and the reaction to that. Now, the reason we are going to talk about some of the individuals here is that basically what we try to do is to examine who were the key players during the negotiations. Of course, everyone knows about the supreme leader. He is the ultimate authority. He has been the ultimate authority. But who were the ones who were directly involved in the negotiations? Looking at it in the past 12 years, under three different presidents, there were four individuals who pretty much dominated the negotiations all throughout this period. And these four individuals starts with Hassan Rouhani, and then Ali Larijani, who was the Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council and the Chief Nuclear Negotiator for a period, and then succeeded by Saeed Jalili, who was the top nuclear negotiator until less than 2 years ago. And then basically Javad Zarif has taken over the talks in the past 2 years, and he's continuing to be the top nuclear negotiator in his position as the foreign minister of the Iranian regime. Now, these four players, as I mentioned, there is a reason that it's really contained to basically four individuals under three presidents and everything overseen by the supreme leader, because this whole thing is a very solid, rigid, well-designed, well-thought plan that they want to execute it in a very meticulous way. Now, in terms of Rouhani, compared to the other three, by far, he has had the most important, significant role, and he has been involved all throughout the negotiations ever since the talks started. And how did they start? It started with the revelation in 2002 of the nuclear sites in Natanz and Iraq by the National Council of Resistance of Iran, right here in Washington, D.C., that basically triggered the inspections of the International Atomic Energy Agency of all the nuclear sites of Iran, something that didn't exist before that. And the inspections of the IAEA and all the problems that came as a result, major crisis for the regime, especially keeping in mind that the NCRI, based on the information provided to them by the network inside the country of the Mujahedin-e-Khalq, the MEK, were holding press conferences, one after the other, revealing nuclear sites after the other. And before Iran was able to get its act together about the first revelation, the next one would come, and the next one, and the next one. There was a whole host of issues that came as a result of those revelations. So what happened? Then Khamenei, the supreme leader, ordered Rouhani to basically take over the nuclear file and they resolve this big, major crisis that the regime was facing as a result of these revelations. So in October 2003, Rouhani was appointed as the top nuclear negotiator by the Supreme Leader Khamenei. And even though in August of 2005, Khatami, the former president, was gone, and Ahmadinejad had taken over, and nevertheless, even though the Rouhani was not the Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, however, he remained in the Supreme National Security Council as the personal representative of Khamenei, pretty much overseeing things on behalf of Khamenei. And then in August of 2013, he even had a more important role, because as the president, he was basically the chair of the Supreme National Security Council, heading the whole thing, the whole operations. Now, why we're emphasizing on Rouhani? Because if we understand his role from day one until now, as we talk, then what he says, and either privately or overtly, would become very important. It's not a talk by some ragtag elements within the regime. Rather, it's from someone who knows the nuclear file and who has been involved in every aspect of things since day one. Now, there were, aside from the talks that are going on right now, there were basically two periods that Tehran had some level of success and some kind of resolution, especially after the original crisis came to picture as a result of the NCRI revelations. One was the what they call the Tehran Declaration that came in October 2003. As you can tell by the name, that was a declaration that was issued by the EU3. In the beginning, it was the EU3, France, Germany, and Britain that were involved in negotiations. And then the next one came in November of 2004, was called as Paris Declaration. That it put some kind of a halt on the advancement of the nuclear program of Iran, freezing some aspects of the program. However, as far as Tehran was concerned, it would freeze stepped up effort by the international community. And Rouhani certainly played a crucial role in both of those declarations. Now, having said that, I'm going to get back to the report because the report is heavily based on two sets of sources. One, public sources, and second, classified reports that are internal, but the NCRI has been able to ascertain copies of those classified reports that I think would be important and shed some light on where Tehran is going in terms of the negotiations. Now, in terms of the public sources, perhaps one of the most important sources that is actually published in Farsi language, not in English or any other languages, is a book that was issued by Rouhani It's called Amniyat Milli wa Diplomasi Hastei, which translates to National Security and Nuclear Diplomacy. This is the cover of the book that was published in Iran. And the book was published in the autumn of 2011. Of course, at that time, obviously, Hassan Rouhani didn't know that he's going to become president. Perhaps if that were the case, he wouldn't have said most of the things he said in this book. And it's a 1,200-page book, and it's basically the memoir of Rouhani that covers mostly the period between 2003 and 2004 when he was basically heading the negotiations. The other one is a major speech that Rouhani made in November of 2003, and it was before the Supreme Cultural Revolution Council. And later on, a couple of years later, it was called in a quarterly publication called the Rah Board, which is issued by the Expediency Council. And having said that, let's look at the classified sources that we've used in order to prepare this report. One of them is basically, there are basically two reports, classified reports by the Office of the Political and Legal Studies of the Majlis, the Parliament. Both of them were published in December 2004. The first one is called Substantive Study of Tehran and Paris Agreements, dealing with the Paris Agreement and the Tehran Agreement. The other one is a critical and analytical look at the Paris Agreement. Specifically, this one focused on the Paris Agreement. Again, as I said, this is not published anywhere. This was obtained by the National Council of Resistance of Iran. It's in Farsi. Some parts have been translated and included in the report that we are releasing for the first time today. Now, the major theme looking at the whole process of negotiations as far as Iran is concerned is that to emphasize on what they call trust building as opposed to transparency. What the international community wants from the Iranian regime, they want clear transparency. What Tehran is trying to get is to avoid transparency and emphasize on trust building. Trust us. We're telling the truth. This is all we have, and we're going to work with you. We're going to cooperate with you. That's the theme Tehran has been pursuing, so that the issue of transparency, the issue of the inspections, will be moved to the sidelines and will not be in the front burner. That's the basically the strategy Tehran has been pursuing ever since the talks started. And we're going to revisit this because, remember, this trust building versus transparency, this is the key theme governing basically all the interactions of Tehran from day one, and as we speak right now, as the nuclear negotiators are talking in Vienna. Now, in terms of trust building, as I said, basically relying on verbal promises and commitments, telling them in private meetings, making promises in words. Remember, when the talks started, even in 2013, actually it started before that, but right after the Joint Plan of Action, no documents ever came out throughout this whole period until April of 2015. Even that, there was not a single document that everyone agreed upon or everyone signed on to it as a framework agreement. Tehran went its own way, saying this is what we agreed upon, and the 5+1 had their own versions. Even that was, divided. The U.S. version was somewhat different than the French version. This is the strategy of Tehran. They will not commit to anything in writing, anything solid, anything hard. Rather, they give you promises and talks and building this atmosphere of trust. Now, the other thing that has played well into the hands of the Iranian regime is this issue related to what they call the fatwa associated with the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, that apparently he has said that he's against developing or pursuing nuclear weapons. This has basically been used by Tehran and some of the negotiators who want to give the benefit of the doubt that has been highlighted. Even as we speak, this issue is coming up, and we're going to address that because it's very important to understand this whole issue about the fatwa business. Now, in terms of transparency, there's demand for immediate relief from international sanctions with no commitment to disclosing full history of Iran's nuclear program. This is what they're pursuing, Iran is pursuing, and they're refusing to answer 11 outstanding questions from the IAEA that relates directly to the military aspect of the Iranian regime program, what they call possible military dimensions, or also known as PMD. And also refusal to allow access for international inspectors to sensitive military sites, individuals, and documents. Now, let's talk about the fatwa. This is one of the top clothes of the mullahs that has emerged in the past few years. It's been used repeatedly by top Iran regime negotiators and officials. Hassan Rouhani, before he actually traveled to New York in 2013, he was still in Tehran. He talked about the fatwa as basically a proof that we're not going to build a bomb. And also, when he spoke at the UN General Assembly in 2013, again, he cited the fatwa as a piece of proof for the peaceful nature of the mullah's program. Jawad Zarif, the regime's foreign minister, he repeatedly uses that, and he basically used that to suggest that they're not pursuing nuclear weapons, and there's no militaristic nature to the program of Iran. Now, first of all, there is no fatwa. Let's make that very clear. There's nothing written in with the handwriting of Khamenei and with his stamp, because that's the way the fatwas are. It's to be written by hand, and it has to be signed and stamped. No, there's no such document. No one has ever seen such a thing. It has never. We don't have a secret fatwa. Apparently, there's something that doesn't even exist, and everyone is talking about it. Second, even if there were such a fatwa, it really doesn't mean anything, because not all prohibited fatwas are binding for the government or officials. Basically, for a fatwa to have credibility based on what Ayatollah Jalal Ganjei basically discussed this in length. He's one of the senior Ayatollahs of Iran who studied in Qom in Najaf for many years. He was a student of Khomeini in the early years and then departed from him. And he knows exactly how things operate in the Shia clergy and in Iran. And he basically contended that there are three grounds for credibility for a fatwa. One is its correctness, second is utility, and third is the competence of the one who actually issues it. You can't just have anyone walking the street saying, I issued a fatwa. So you have to have the proper credentials to do that. And Ali Khamenei certainly is not considered a jurisprudent in the Iranian and Shia religious centers. So his competence is under question to begin with. And now, again, even if a fatwa were issued, a fatwa is only binding for the followers of the religious scholar who issues it. So, if there are, 10, 15, or 5 different clergy who have followers, who are the sources of emulation, they have their own followers, and if an Ayatollah issues a fatwa, it has nothing to do with those who are following another Ayatollah. So And therefore, it's not binding for the officers or commanders who follow another religious scholar or consider themselves not needed. You know, there are people who just don't follow him. And it's even, you know, others are not really required to follow it. And even if they were following him and they did something that is against his fatwa, there's no punishment for it. It's not mandatory. So they don't even have to adhere to a fatwa that was issued by their own leader, religious leader. Now, the other point is that even if fatwa is issued, it can always be voided by what they call the secondary decree, which is, you know, under emergency circumstances, you can have, you know, another fatwa, or just basically violate it because the conditions are emergency. In the situation of war, for instance, you know, there are ample evidence and cases that you can go against it. And more importantly, any decision about the need to use a nuclear bomb is not up to the scholar who has issued a fatwa. A scholar can issue a fatwa, and then there are other people who can build a bomb. The scholar doesn't decide what you're going to build in the country or what you're going to do. He just issues a fatwa, assuming that there is such a fatwa, which actually doesn't exist. Now, having said that, let's get to the main issue that when we first started, we said we're going to address, which is what are the governing rules of the Iranian regime when it comes to the negotiations. The first rule is that it's the supreme leader. That's the bottom line. Basically, the negotiating team advances the strategy dictated by the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. So it's not about anybody else. It's not about any other agencies or bodies within the regime. It's the supreme leader, period. And that's why you have only a limited number of people being involved in the negotiation process, because the supreme leader wants to make sure that his desires, his objectives are closely pursued. For instance, Saeed Jalili, we talked about him, the former top nuclear negotiator, was also presidential candidate supported by Khamenei. He is now actually the person who is an advisor to heads the political department of an organ that advises the supreme leader. It's called the Supreme Council for the Office of the Leadership. So Saeed Jalili still is in the loop. Then the second issue governing their policies is that they have done everything possible over the past 12 years to evade the military dimension of the nuclear program of Iran. They either never discussed the issue during the talks, or intentionally watered it down. The military sites have, in principle, been excluded from the inspections. You look at the inspections. Where does the IAEA go when they go to Iran? They go to Natanz, they go to Iraq, and a number of other places that they have been to, but not the military sites that they have been interested in going. A lot of them that we exposed, but they have been barred from going there. Now, in some cases that there were exceptional access granted, the access has been extremely controlled, limited, opaque, and basically designed to remove the issue from the table. One example is the inspection of the site, the military site, Parchin, that only one time the access was provided to the IAEA. That was in 2005, that's 10 years ago. And it was very, very specific to a certain part of the site, and actually turned out to be the wrong part of the site. And ever since, that access has not been provided to Parchin. Now, the third element is that Tehran has been only dealing with the disclosed part of the program, meaning that all the negotiations, all the agreements have just involved the disclosed those aspects of the nuclear program of Iran. And they have shown no desire to basically reveal all the aspects of their program to the country. They have done everything possible to deviate attention and portraying that whatever you see is the whole thing, and we have nothing else to hide. And then another revelation comes from the resistance or other sources, and they say, oh yeah, by the way, we forgot about that. Yes, that's also in addition to what we have, but that's the whole thing we have. That has been consistently continuing since day one, and I will deal with some of the facts about that later on if the opportunity comes. Now, the other thing is the strategy is basically dragging the IAEA. They basically, with their dealings with the IAEA, try to cloak the program. They dodge essential responses to queries that the IAEA has not made it. They created ambiguity. They left their questions unanswered. And they only offered replies when they really had no choice. They were really pushed to the corner. And then they would also provide, when that opportunity comes, very, very minimal to basically escape further scrutiny. Now, the other aspect of the program, when you look at it, is that their intention has always been to maintain the entire nuclear infrastructure of the regime. Khamenei had done every attempt to preserve the nuclear program in its entirety. And also the research and development has never been ceased throughout this period. Now, the other aspect, which I call it aspect number 6, is building trust verbally, as something that I tangentially talked about it. When serious issues are raised about the nuclear program of Iran, they, verbally, they make all kinds of promises. Oh, sure, we can address this, we'll address this and that, and just basically building expectations without ever delivering on that. One of the things they've been doing, that they've been using the already disclosed secrets to basically build trust without responding to key queries by the IAEA. And now the last one, basically governing the talks, is that the desire and the effort by Tehran to keep the talks alive. They have been very good in just basically dragging the whole thing, despite intermittent delays or stop at some periods. But all throughout this period, the talks have remained alive, and they have basically built an inclination among the negotiators that we're going to succeed. We're going to get to where you want to get. This way, they were able to diffuse the policies of the West, diffuse firm policies, and avoiding confrontation and avoiding the crash of the talks. Now, having said that, now let's get to the tactics. What tactics they use to accomplish those 7 objectives we actually talked about. Now, one of the main tactics they've been using is basically buying time, and the mullahs are experts in doing that. Just prolong the negotiations and buy as much time as you can, because during this period they could advance their nuclear program. They could put a hold and pause on decisive and firm policies of the West, and basically offer very little in terms of transparency. The second thing is basically to avoid the what they call the PMD, possible military interventions, distracting the whole negotiation process away from the military aspects of the sites, pushing the PMD to the sidelines, and watering down the role of the top military officials, the military figures who've been involved in the decision-making process of the program. For instance, Hassan Rouhani never clarified the role of the top IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, Brigadier General Ali Hussein Tash, who was at the time the Deputy Defense Minister, and he was sitting in just about all of the meetings of the Supreme Nuclear Committee during the years in 2003 and 2004, and because and also the agency that was tasked with the weaponization, which was later on further developed in what is now known as SAPAN, SPND, was basically overseen by Hossein Taj, the number 2 person in the Defense Ministry, overseeing the whole thing. And Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, the top nuclear expert of the Iranian regime, was reporting directly to Ali Hossein Taj. So that's a very obvious, clear red flag right there. But Tehran somehow found a way to water it down and downplay it. Now, the third tactic was to deprive access to sensitive sites. Basically, either refusing totally to allow the IAEA to go there, or just deferring them to some, future circumstances, or as I mentioned, the example of Parchin, or for instance, the site in Kala Electric, that the IAEA was very interested to look at the site when we first exposed it in February 2003 in a press conference right here in Washington, D.C. And the IAEA eventually was able to go there in August of 2003. Yet they had managed to delay the access, and in this period they had cleaned up the place. Later on, of course, the IAEA eventually found out about the traces of highly enriched uranium there, and one of the major problems that was aroused as a result of that is the one in Polyelectric. So Tehran learned their lessons. It's lessons that they're not going to provide access to any sensitive sites that would cause trouble for them down the road. The other tactic is basically hide everything until they find out about it. Just lie and hide it, and when you are caught, then you will deal with it down the road. That has been the governing tactic of the regime. There's nothing that they would come up front and tell you, this is what we have, this is what we've been doing. 12 years they've been hiding. The lack of transparency regarding projects, regarding the smuggling networks, illicit measures that been kept secret until they were exposed either by the Iranian resistance or out through some other sources or through their own investigations. Tehran has been basically drilling out information only when they were confronted. They conceded to the existence of the nuclear sites or projects only after they were exposed by the NCRI, and basically responded to the IAEA queries only after the fact. So now we'll get to the fifth tactic, which is basically deferring the IAEA to some very comprehensive, rosy, accurate reports that is going to come down the road. In order to evade specific questions on specific subjects, they would say, okay, we'll respond to this in a comprehensive report later on down the road. So they would buy time, they would evade addressing specific questions, and then when the big report comes out, which they have done in a number of occasions, the issue is not there. And then the IAEA had to chase the regime to find out what happened to that specific issue. They're basically back to square one after losing months, if not years, of chasing the issue. I remember back in 2003, I think it was October 2003, that the regime provided its first, the tell-all report. It's a comprehensive and accurate report that they provided to the IAEA. And later on, all the flaws came out of it, that pretty much all the key aspects of the nuclear program of Iran was accidentally left out of the report. That's just simply one example of that. There are so many other cases that occurred since 2003. Now, the other tactic they use is to basically create this atmosphere of optimism. that yes, things are going well, and there are certain gaps that we're gonna bridge those gaps. So this way, by building the atmosphere of optimism, they can extract concessions. Because if the other party feel that you're not going to cooperate with them, these talks are not going to go anywhere, they would not provide you with any concessions. But if you build expectations, then they say, okay, maybe it's worth to give them these points so that we can eventually get an agreement at the end of the road. So that has been their tactic. They've been very successfully using it. Now, the other tactic has been to making a red line, the halt to the research and development. Basically, totally removing the issue of the R&D, or what I call the research and development, from the discussions. Always when it comes to the R&D, Tehran has been very adamant that we're going to keep this program. It's basically genuine, benign technology, and we cannot give up our technology. Under that excuse, they have maintained their R&D, and so that has really allowed them to rush forward and get closer and closer to their final objective. And the last point, the last tactic, are basically the side talks. When you have, they were negotiating with the EU3 before, and now it's 6 other partners, 5+1. So in order to divide among them and always find a weak point and exploit the weak party, as opposed to others, they would get into private discussions here and there, and trying to get some of the elements within the P5+1 or even individuals on their side as a way to undermine the unity of the 5+1, take away the decisiveness of the nuclear negotiators. Now, having said that, let me conclude. The conclusion that came out of this report, so it's about a 30-page report that took over a year to put this report together. Basically, you can see very easily that Tehran has 3 red lines. Khamenei, Supreme Leader, has 3 red lines that has not allowed and is still insisting that they would not be crossed. One is no access to military sites for the inspectors, period. No access to the nuclear scientists for the inspectors, whether it's the nuclear scientists or anyone associated, involved in the nuclear program of Iran. Khamenei has said no to that. And no stopping of the research and development in the nuclear field. Now, what does this tell you? The 3 red lines. This is the core of the nuclear weapons program of Iran. Because the core of the nuclear weapons program of Iran is not Natanz, is not Iraq. Rather, it's the operation, the parallel program they have in the secret sites run by the military and controlled by the military for a certain objective, which is giving Tehran the bomb as rapidly as possible. If the Iranian regime would allow the inspectors access to the military sites, it would open up, or at least to the parts of the program that they have, the ones that have already been exposed, or we have already exposed but have not been accessed by the IAEA, or things that could be exposed later on. And then the individuals are so important because throughout the interviews, a lot of information can come out. With the cross-examination, they can find out about the validity of what the regime has said and get to the bottom of things about what role each player played. And then in this way, they can actually find out even more about the role of the military, meaning the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, in the whole nuclear program of Iran. And also the research and development is so crucial because if Tehran succeeds, as they have done to a good extent so far, in building more advanced centrifuges, they already have IR2M that are 5 to 7 times faster and more efficient than the regular IR1. They're working on IR3, 4, 5, and even IR8. Some of them, once developed, could be 20 or 25 times faster than the regular centrifuges. So what does that mean? That means if you have only a few hundred centrifuges, that's equivalent to thousands of centrifuges. It would provide as much output as thousands of current centrifuges would do. So, and you need a really small space, a small underground building, so a small workshop could house those centrifuges, and it's almost impossible to detect them. There's no sound, there's no detection machines, there's no satellite ways to get to them unless you have actually human on-the-ground intelligence about them. You wouldn't know. So you can run a very small operation with tremendous capability, way beyond what they actually have in Natanz, which is a huge place. Of course, it's already known because we exposed it in 2002. So that's why they are emphasizing on these points, and that's why these red lines must not be agreed upon by the international community. Now, let's deal at the end with the way forward, moving ahead. What are the things that the negotiating team should emphasize on? Let me say first that as far as we're concerned, the uranium resistance is concerned, the whole right to enrich uranium, which is already been granted to the Iran regime, is a big fault and should not have been done. And therefore, it really removes the possibility of what they call a good deal. However, what remains of the other options, these steps actually could create major obstacles for the Iran regime. Number one, unconditional and snap access to all the known and suspect sites of the Iran regime, including military, security, and non-military sites. Unconditional and immediate access of the IAEA to all the scientists and individuals involved in the nuclear program. And third one is a complete and unambiguous and satisfactory addressing of the IAEA questions of the PMD. There's already 11 questions outstanding. And then the fourth one is the disclosure of the relationship of Iran, the Iran regime, with some of its foreign counterparts, including North Korea, which we recently said that was involved in providing technology for the nuclear warhead, in addition to missile and the nuclear program. And then removal of all the enriched uranium in Iran, with the exception of 300 kilograms that was agreed upon, out of Iran, because otherwise, Tehran would be able to revert them back to the uranium hexafluoride. And then the sixth issue is they should really come clean about the documents, all of their networks, all the questions that are really outstanding out there by the IAEA. The seventh one is they have to ratify and implement what they call additional protocol plus that would provide intrusive inspections to all the desired sites in Iran, and then making the lifting of the sanctions conditional upon transparency and full compliance, and nothing should be relieved prematurely, and finally the full implementation of the Security Council resolutions. Basically, that's an overview of the report. The report has extensive quotations from the books and documents I mentioned to you, from all of those top officials, that corroborates and supports the findings. I basically went over the findings of the report, not the quotations. So thank you very much for listening to me until now. I'm more than happy to respond to your questions wherever you are, whether you're in the United States, in Europe, overseas, in the Middle East, everywhere else. So happy to hear your questions and respond to them.
Good morning, Mr. Jafarzadeh. We have a lot of questions, especially from the Middle East journalists. So we'll try to get to as many as possible, but we may not have time for all of them. The first question that I have is from Al Muslimun newspaper in Egypt, and they are asking what are the options for 5+1 if Iran rejects inspection?
Well, I think if the Iranian regime would reject inspections, and of course, I think what the journalist means by rejecting inspections is that basically a comprehensive inspection of all the sites in Iran, including the military sites. If that were to be the case, I think then there should be no agreement, period. There's not a good or acceptable agreement that would not allow access to those sites. This is reiterated even in a statement that was just put out yesterday by a number of top nuclear scientists in the United States, including at least 5 of them who worked for the Obama administration, who were part of the negotiating team, and they feel if those inspections are not provided, then no deal should be made available. Now, the other thing, the next step after that, if there's no deal, is to basically step up pressure on the Iranian regime, because there's ample tools available to the international community, including stepping up sanctions, including addressing all aspects of the rogue behavior of the Iranian regime in terms of their terrorism, their human rights violations in Iran, export of Islamic fundamentalism in the region, that basically the world has been silent about it. So you need to ratchet up pressure on that, especially keeping in mind that this regime is highly vulnerable domestically, internally. The Iranian population are very dissatisfied with the regime, and they want to see a change in Iran, a democratic change, a change of the regime that would not deprive them of their rights, their civil rights, their rights for freedom of speech, for their freedom of religion, gender equality, and economic prosperity. And that option is certainly available, but has not been pursued to the country, has been, to a good extent, hampered by the fixation of the international community over getting a nuclear deal with Iran.
Okay, the next question that I have is from Mr. Mustafa Amareh from the Iraqi newspaper Azaman International, and he has asked, in your view, is the Iranian regime on the verge of completing its nuclear program with military goals?
Well, as the if I go back to the conclusion of the report, certainly the Iranian regime's agenda is to complete its nuclear weapons program. As we speak, the Supreme Leader Khamenei has maintained his decision to build a nuclear bomb and to proceed with weaponization and build a bomb. So the objective is certainly building nuclear weapons. The whole purpose of the negotiations is not to abandon the nuclear weapons program of Iran, rather to maintain the entire nuclear infrastructure while lifting sanctions and getting relief in the sanctions area.
Mr. Sa'an Abdul Qadir from the 14th March website from Lebanon has asked you, given the facts mentioned in the press conference, how likely do you think an agreement will be?
Well, that's a tough question to answer, because I'm not privy to all the details that is really going on between the Iranian regime and the P5+1. But if the Iranian regime will continue to insist on what it has been insisting in the past few days, for instance, Supreme Leader Khamenei has repeatedly said that he's not going to allow inspections of the nuclear sites, the military sites, and the security sites. And he's not going to allow the access to the scientists. He's not going to put a halt or limitation on the research and development. If that's going to remain the position of the Iranian regime, and the international community would not bring more pressure on Tehran to comply, then I think we're not going to have a deal. However, if the international community either steps up pressure on Tehran to force them to comply, because Tehran has only complied over the past 12 years when they were forced to do it, or the international community would basically back down from all their legitimate, demands, then you're going to have some kind of an agreement. I think the jury is still out, and we don't know where things are going to go, but I think what we need to do is to emphasize on what is really important that the international community needs to do. What is it that they need to emphasize on, as our report today included.
Mr. Abdul Qadir from the 14th March website has another question. What countries are helping the Iranian regime with its nuclear projects?
Well, the Iranian regime has benefited extensively from foreign assistance over the years. It started with the extensive support they got from A.Q. Khan, the top nuclear scientist of Pakistan, that provided a lot of the blueprints, the technology for enrichment, even centrifuge parts, and that they had in Pakistan basically shipped to Iran, and that significantly benefited the enrichment program of Iran. The Iran regime has benefited assistance from North Korea, dating back to roughly about 30 years ago, and continuously until today, both in the field of missile program, but also its nuclear program and the nuclear warhead technology. The Khalq electric site that I mentioned just now in the report today, that we exposed in 2003, that was the first site that Iran did enrichment. They were doing tests, what they call a pilot facility. It acted as the first pilot facility for enrichment in Iran. And who had provided technology for enrichment in Khalq electric? It was North Korea. And you can refer to other countries such as Russia that have helped with some aspects of the technology in the centrifuge and their missile program, the guidance system of the missile program. Tehran had benefited from the help from China. But most importantly, I think, overall, the indecisive policies of the West, Europe and the United States in the past few years, especially ever since we exposed the nuclear sites in Natanz and Iraq in 2002 that triggered the IAEA inspections of Iranian sites, those indecisive policies has allowed the Iranian regime to complete its program to the level they are, to advance the program. Imagine if there were a decisive policy by the West right after 2002, none of the technology they now have, they possessed at the time. And the West would have been in a much better position to contain the nuclear weapons program of Iran, if not entirely halted, than they are today.
Two viewers on Twitter, Safe and Bahrain 198, plus Mr. Gadawi and Okaz newspaper from Saudi Arabia have asked, how can Iran's nuclear program be stopped?
Well, even though, as I said now, it would have been much easier to stop the program back in 2002 and 2003 when we made those major revelations, nevertheless, it's still possible to stop the Iranian regime from developing nuclear weapons. But it needs a very sharp turnaround in the policies of the United States and the P5+1. We need to see a totally different approach that would deny the Iranian regime the legitimate right to enrich uranium, that would implement all the Security Council resolutions, that would not provide any kind of relief for Tehran until they fully comply with the response to the PMD and all the rogue behavior they're doing with the nuclear weapons program. If that approach is pursued, I believe it's still very possible to do that. However, knowing the nature of this regime, knowing the whole background and history of the past few years, the ultimate solution really lies in the change of the leadership, the regime in Tehran. The problem is really the nature of this regime. This is a regime that is armed with the extremist terrorist ideology that suppresses its own population, exploits the Muslim population around the world, and spews hatred in the region. That regime is highly unpopular among its own population. There is great desire for change among the Iranian population, as we have seen over the past few years, including in summer of 2009, when people chanted death to Khamenei, death to the supreme leader, death to the Velayat Faqih system. They rejected this entirety of the regime. And there is an alternative, as we saw in the gathering in Paris of just past week, of more than 100,000 people from all walks of life, political spectrum of the Iranian society, who called for change in Iran, and Mrs. Mayam Rajavi discussed her 10-point plan for the future of Iran: a free Iran, a democratic Iran, a secular Iran, a non-nuclear Iran, an Iran that will respect the rights of religious minorities and would treat women equally, and freedom of expression would be the principle of governing the society. That's the kind of Iran I think we should be looking for. In that case, you will see the threat of the nuclear weapons program of Iran eliminated. Not only that, but all the trouble Tehran is creating in the region as the epicenter of international terrorism would be eliminated also.
This question is from Mr. Tawfiq Al-Mubayazin from the Jordanian Directna news agency. And he has asked, in the view of many, the Iranian regime has given in to the demands of the US and Europe regarding signing an agreement. And this limits the regime's power. What has the Iranian regime gained from this?
Well, what the Iran regime has gained through the negotiations since 2002 is that they have maintained their entire nuclear infrastructure, even though there has been some limitations, nothing really significant, but they maintained the entire nuclear infrastructure. They took away the decisiveness of the international community and basically froze any efforts that could be done by the international community to step up pressure on them. And then they convinced, by getting engaged in the talks, some of the Western countries to basically invest on the Iranian regime, while they could easily see that this regime is highly unpopular, is detested by its own population, and the Iranian people reject this regime and they want change in that country. So I think the mere fact that Tehran has been able to continue and move its program forward throughout this period and to freeze the international policies has been, too much of a gain for an Iranian regime that is highly unpopular in the region and in Iran and detested in the region. So that's why we need to see a turnaround in that kind of an approach and that kind of a policy.
Mr. Qais, Abu Nasr from Radio Vakan in Egypt is asking you, does the agreement between the Iran regime and the West include a halt of the decisive storm operation?
As far as I know, the agreement is basically limited to the nuclear aspect of the Iranian regime, and none of the regional policies of the regime are actually included in the agreement. However, I think that's a good point that was raised, because given what happened in the Operation Decisive Storm, that a number of regional countries in the Middle East and Persian Gulf area decided to take things on their own and confront the Iranian regime and their agents and their mercenaries in the region. we saw that how vulnerable the Iranian regime is. Unlike, contrary to what they claim, that they are powerful, they're decisive, and they can do anything as they wish. In reality, that's not the case. This is a regime that is extremely weak. It's very vulnerable, both domestically, but also regionally. When you have a regime that is detested by its own population, disliked by the countries in the region, especially after 30 plus years of the rule of the mullahs, there lies opportunity for the international community to see the real Iran through the eyes of the Iranian people. The Iranian people want change. This regime is vulnerable and can be changed and must be changed, as Mrs. Rajivi reiterated time and again in the recent rally in Paris. So I think if there are lessons learned from the Operation Decisive Storm in the region, is that we need to see more of that. We need to see other countries in the region to step up to the plate and pursue the policies that were pursued by those countries in the region. And don't be afraid of this regime. This regime is vulnerable, is weak, and can be defeated.
This question comes from the Iraqi news agency VAA. It says, John Kerry said on Wednesday, quote, "It may be that the Iranians will not fill out the full measure of what was agreed at Lausanne, and in that case, there will not be an agreement," end quote. The question, what should be the U.S. policy to prevent a nuclear Iran, given that it's clear that Iran's regime will not be living up to the Lausanne Agreement?
Well, first of all, even with all the flaws of the Lausanne Agreement, even that Tehran has already rejected a good portion of it. And if the international community is going to really have any success with the Iranian regime, they need to emphasize and keep pushing on the very key principles of the Lausanne Agreement. Otherwise, there should be no agreement whatsoever. I mean, all the concessions have already been given to the Iranian regime. There's no more room for that. To the contrary, I think if there is going to be any way for success, there has to be emphasis on the key aspects of the Lausanne Agreement by the United States, by the P5+1. And here I think the countries in the region have an important role to play to show that how much they disagree with allowing Iran to get the bomb. Also, U.S. Congress has a major role to play because Congress can reverse the direction that is not going in the right direction. They have a powerful voice, they have a bipartisan voice, they must have a say, and it was Congress that made these negotiations possible. It was Congress that passed those acts and legislation and resolutions to impose sanctions on Iran that eventually played a role in bringing the regime to the negotiating table. Therefore, this is the time for Congress to play its part, to play its role, rather than allowing the P5+1 unilaterally work with the Iranian regime and come up with an agreement that may not be a good agreement.
I have a question here from Mr. Sa'an Abdul Qadir from the 14th March website in Lebanon. Do you think that a nuclear agreement is part of a larger deal between Washington and Tehran?
Well, there's an official position that it's not, that this is basically strictly a nuclear agreement. But there is an unofficial position that is everyone looking at the situation, they are wondering, why is it that the United States and the P5+1 are so silent about the outright behavior of the Iranian regime in the region? Why is it that with all the support and funds and military assistance that the Iran is providing to Assad and the Syrian government, there is no punishment for Iran? Why is it that Tehran was allowed to operate freely in Iraq, to wield its influence among the Shia militias who would not have any say in Iraq if it weren't for the support, direct support coming from Tehran, waging sectarian violence, fully backing Maliki until the last day, and now allowing the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and the commander of the Quds Force, Qasem Soleimani, freely operating in Iraq, which only fans the flames of discord in the region and makes things worse. Why is it that Iran, the regime, was allowed to operate so extensively in Yemen, fully backing Houthis, until the countries in the region stood up? It wasn't the Western countries, it wasn't the United States or the PP 5+1. It was the countries in the region that stood up, against the aggressive policy of the Iran regime. Why is it that the United States has been so silent about the violations of human rights in Iran? There's been more killings in Iran under Rouhani than it was under Ahmadinejad for the similar period. The rights of women, the rights of religious minorities are being deprived. Political prisoners are under harsh torture. A number of political prisoners have been executed under Rouhani, especially those who've been associated with the Mujahedin-e-Khalq, including Ghulam Mirza Khosravi, and a number of others. But the Western countries have primarily been silent about that in the hope that they will get an agreement with Tehran. This is not acceptable. The Western countries, the United States and others, must hold the regime responsible and accountable for everything they're doing in the region and internally, in addition to pursuing the nuclear weapons program. Nuclear negotiations must not be a justification for closing eyes on the killings in Iran and the export of terrorism in the region.
Jubin Katirai from Iran Focus, based in London, has sent you this question. Mr. Jafarzadeh, the narrative in Washington regarding Iran's nuclear program is either an Iranian bomb or bombing Iran. Do you think this is the only narrative, or are there other options?
Well, these are certainly not the only narratives. There are many people who want to make it that way, so that because you don't want war, then the outcome would be that you would want to continue negotiating with Iran and giving them concessions. There is a third option, and the third option is democratic change in Iran. That's something that wouldn't require a military option, wouldn't require appropriating money, wouldn't require giving concessions and pursuing an appeasement policy with the Iranian regime. All it requires is to see the realities on the ground as they are, that the people of Iran, the vast majority of the people of Iran, do not want this regime. Mrs. Rajabi introduced the third option many, many years ago in various speeches in Europe and also before the US Congress in April of this year, showing the world that there is a third option. And the third option is not just good for the people of Iran. The third option is the best option for the people in the region, for the countries in Europe, and the United States, because it would turn Iran into a country that would abide by international norms. It would be a country that would be non-belligerent. It would be a country that would not pursue nuclear weapons. It would be a country that would not support terrorism in the region and would not support Islamic fundamentalism. So yes, absolutely, this third option is the option that needs to be pursued. Countries in the region need to look at it, need to support it, and the US Congress and the administration should do the same. Well, I think we can go on and on, but we had a window of 1 hour for this conference, and I think I've already consumed my 1 hour. I'm maybe a couple of minutes over. So I want to thank all the viewers for being patient and listening to us to present to you the report by the National Council of Resistance of Iran about the tactics and the objectives of the Iran regime throughout the negotiations with the P5+1 and before that with the EU3, and what needs to be done. The way forward in the remaining days, we only have less than a week left before the deadline approaches. It may be extended, whatever it takes. The findings of this report, we hope, will be taken into serious consideration by all the policymakers in Washington and in the capitals in Europe. Again, thank you very much, and so long from our office in the National Council of Resistance of Iran, U.S. Representative Office in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much.